toward the payphone in the building, and he saw the man actually go to the phone before he left. What? We're told less than an hour later he shoots a cop in South Dallas for stopping him on the street. But here's a guy that says he's Secret Service. He doesn't shoot him. In fact, he shows him where the phone is. Now, let me show you how they screw everything up here. McNeil of McNeil-Lair Report. What's his name? Robert McNeil, I believe. Okay, and then there was another newsman also who, both of them have told the same story. They don't remember anything, but months afterwards, the Secret Service came to them and said, well, you encountered the assassin trying to leave the building because you were looking for a payphone. Yeah, that's right. Well, he directed you to the payphone. And so Robert McNeil, and his name I got a block, but he narrated the walking guide that you get at the Sixth Floor Museum. Oh, it's on the tip of my tongue. But anyway, both of them tell the same story. They don't remember it themselves, but they were told by the Secret Service after a few months that they had actually encountered the Oswald at the time. So there you go. And now, see, if you try to bring up this point that was published in the Warren Commission, they'll say, oh, it was just a newsman. But to me, I think the key to it is that Oswald said whoever this fellow was showed him a book of identification. Well, now, I was a newsman at that time, and I had a press card, but it was a press card. I'd carry it in my hat sometimes, or you'd show it. But who has a book of identification? FBI, Secret Service, they've got those leather folders with the badge and the ID, a book of identification. So who were these people with identification as a Secret Service that was good enough to fool Dallas police and even encountered Lee Harvey Oswald? It was not legitimate Secret Service agents because then, and they are fully documented, that every Secret Service agent was either riding in the motorcade or was already at the trademark. And I might mention that, by the way, that was a violation of Secret Service regulations, which states that you do not make a turn greater than 90 degrees, and if you make a turn of 90 degrees, you station an agent there. Well, that turn from Houston onto Elm Street is about a 120-degree turn. It is so sharp that, in fact, truly, and a lot of the people standing in front of the book depository said the presidential limousine almost bumped up on the curb trying to make that turn. And there was no Secret Service agents officially there. So who were these guys? Again, back to the backyard photograph, and we know we've already looked at A and B, but 15 years later, C shows up. Marina, I think, took some photographs at some point in the backyard, but it was not these. And today she says that, because she said she was taking the photographs and she was standing by the stairs. Well, here's the stairs. There's the stairs. There's the stairs. So here she's facing the stairs. So yeah, I think early on, of course, they had her totally intimidated. She was so afraid they were going to send her and her young children back to Russia that she just told them anything they wanted to hear. And she said, yeah, I took a picture. Well, then it was pointed out there were 2 pictures. So, oh yeah, I took 2 pictures. Now we know there's 3 pictures. In fact, actually there's 4, because the night of the assassination, when she and Marguerite Oswald were being held at the end of Six Flags, Marguerite Oswald said Marina showed her a photograph of, there was a photograph of Lee holding the rifle up over his head like this. And she said, ooh, that's kind of incriminating, let's get rid of that. So they tore it up and flushed it down the toilet. So actually there's 4 photographs, so you can't believe anything Marina says. And the interesting thing about this suppressed photograph that there's never been accounted for and never been explained, and yet in the Warren Commission we find them demonstrating, reenacting the backyard photograph, and what pose do they use? The pose of the 3rd photograph, which was never heard of or explained for 15 years, suppression of evidence. Here's Arlen Specter demonstrating his single bullet theory, that the bullet went right through Kennedy's neck and right down to hit Connally. The only problem is they actually kind of marked the wound. It's still kind of high, but it's closer to where it actually was in his back. So you'll notice that he's got a hole at straight edge about 6 inches over the stand-in's right shoulder just to make it all line up. Doesn't work. Didn't work then, doesn't work now. So what? They just lied to you. Now, did they just simply not understand, or did they know better? They knew better. Here's a transcript of the Warren Commission meeting of January the 27th, 1964. They're just getting underway. Hadn't even really had their full investigation going yet. And yet we read that J. Lee Rankin, their chief counsel, says, well, seems quite apparent now, since we have a picture of where the bullet entered in the back, that the bullet entered below the shoulder blade to the right of the backbone, which is below the place where the picture shows the bullet came out the neckband of the shirt in front, and that bullet, according to the autopsy, didn't strike any bone at all, that particular bullet, and go through, so that how it could turn, and he stops himself because I think he realizes what he's saying. How could it turn in midair and go back down and strike Connolly? So he just stops. They knew. They knew the single bullet theory did not work, so they just lied to you. Destruction of evidence. Here's a picture published in the Star-Telegram the next day, and says one of the rifle bullets fired by the murderer of President Kennedy lies in the grass across Elm Street from the building in which the killer was hiding and from which he launched his assault. Well, this is, of course, a slide made from a print, but I have seen the actual photograph. It was in the files of the Star-Telegram. You can actually see the little cylindrical slug here. And it was in the grass right next to a manhole cover. Now, Chief Curry published these photographs in his book, and here they are at the manhole cover and studying where the bullet in the grass was. Dallas policeman's guarding it. Here he is, that's Foster, and Buddy Walters, the deputy sheriff. When this guy, sandy-haired guy, comes up and reaches down, Chief Curry identifies him as an FBI agent. And, oh, well, he's cramming something in his pocket there. Off it goes. That's the end of that. Didn't happen. All right, and except for these photographs, we wouldn't even know that that happened. Destruction of evidence. Here's a picture of the back of General Walker's house. And they said they found this in Oswald's belongings, and that's when he was casing to take a shot at Walker. And by the way, in the fall of 1964, I interviewed General Walker. He said Oswald didn't do it. He said, because the police told me that the bullet they dug out of my wall was a .30-06. And Oswald was never known to own a .30-06. And he also told me, he said, because the Warren Commission had just come out and been published, that was in September, I think, of '64. I interviewed him, I think, in November of '64. He said, he called him Rubenstein. He said, Rubenstein and Oswald knew each other. Said they're going to have to start all over just on that fact alone. And I found that pretty fascinating, because at that time, General Walker was kind of a suspect himself, because he was head of the right-wingers there in Dallas, and a lot of people thought they were behind the assassination. So Walker himself said, Oswald didn't take a shot at me, but they found a picture of his home there, and look, there's a car here, it looks like a '57 Chevrolet, and a big hole punched in the license plate so you can't tell who it belonged to. Well, here's the police evidence photograph of the evidence they took out of Oswald's possessions, and there's the photograph, and oh, look, that hole's not there. Somebody's poked that hole in there, so we can't tell whose car it was, can't track down who was involved in all of this after it was in the hands of the authorities. That's destruction of evidence. And right up here we see his little tiny Minox camera, okay, also known as a spy camera. See it in all the spy movies, okay? Now, what's he doing with a spy camera? And the serial number is 5 digits. Well, researchers checked with Minox Corporation and found out that all of the Minox cameras available commercially in the United States at that time carried 6-digit serial numbers. So Oswald had a spy camera that was not commercially available. Okay, now that raises a lot of questions, because was he a spy? Was he acting on behalf of somebody? His mother always said he was working for the U.S. government. And there's now abundance of evidence to show that he was being used operationally by the CIA prior to the assassination. In exactly what capacity is still unclear, because they're still withholding documents. But to show you, again, suppression of evidence, intimidation of witnesses, the FBI came back to the 2 Dallas policemen who found all these belongings and tried to get them to change their report so that it didn't reflect they'd found a camera, but they tried to get them to say they'd found a light meter. And the 2 cops wouldn't do it. They said, we know a camera from a light meter. So here was an attempt at intimidation.
Excuse me. Do you have any idea of what, if they had any film on that camera and whether it's developed or not?
Yes, they did, and we didn't see that for years, but back in the 90s, I believe it was, the FBI finally, and that's interesting too, because all this time they denied that he had a Minox camera, in addition to trying to get the police that found it to claim it was a light meter. And yet in the 90s, the FBI, under Freedom of Information Act, finally released a series of photographs taken with a Minox camera that were, and it was the film that was in this camera. What it shows is some scenes from Japan, some ships, and just scenic stuff. Wasn't anything, as I recall, I don't think it was anything that unusual. But I might also mention, though, that with these little binoculars and all of this miniature camera equipment, this was several $1,000s at the time of miniaturized camera equipment in Oswald's possession, and it's never been explained because he was working for minimum wage, never had any money, always complaining about having no money. So, you know, where do you get the money to buy all this expensive camera stuff? But then that gets into the whole thing about Oswald being a spy, an agent. And the evidence of that is just tremendous. I mean, you've got an FBI, CIA paymaster who said he remembered writing checks to Oswald. You've got people who were roommates of his in Japan who said we were recruited into the CIA and we figured he was too. So, you know, it just goes on and on. But here at Parkland, you see the bucket down here. They put the top up on the car and they started washing down the seats, throwing away the flowers that were in there, the little lammy pie figure, trunks open. This is destruction of evidence. They needed to go over this forensically. It was never checked forensically, and on orders of Lyndon Johnson, this car was backed up to Detroit, and was completely torn down and rebuilt and they painted it black instead of the blue that Kennedy had it, and they put armored doors in and bulletproof glass, and they completely rebuilt it. On orders of Johnson, that's destruction of evidence. We know the famous incident of James Hosty, who had been assigned to Oswald. And after the assassination and after Oswald was killed, he had left a note at the FBI headquarters a week or so before. And the secretary who took the note said she couldn't remember exactly what it said, but it seems like it was some sort of warning. And Hosty said, well, he was threatening the FBI. He said, leave my wife alone or I'll do something to the FBI. And yet afterward, the assassination and after Oswald was killed, J. Gordon Shanklin, head of the Dallas FBI office, calls him in and says, well, there won't be a trial, get rid of it. So he started to tear it up. And he said, no, I don't even want it torn up. I don't even want it in this office. So he shredded it up and they flushed it away. Destruction of evidence. Now, I'll simply put this to you. If the note was indeed some kind of warning that threatening violence or whatever against the FBI, you know damn well they would have published it on the front of Life magazine to show what I think what we had here was Oswald trying as a low-level U.S. intelligence agent, exactly as his mother always said, and I think he was trying to warn what was about to happen. I think he was involved in some way, but he thought he was reporting back to the FBI and they would be putting a stop to it. And I think nobody was more surprised when Kenny was actually shot than Lee Harvey Oswald. And I'm going to tell you something else. I can't prove this, but I'll tell you this. Years ago, several policemen in the Dallas Police Force told me that a couple of weeks before the assassination, they had received a letter to the Dallas Police signed by A.J. Hidell. Well, we all know Alex James Hidell was Oswald's alternate identification. And it warned that there was going to be an assassination attempt on President Kennedy and that they needed to tighten up the security. Well, the Dallas Police, Lieutenant Jack Revel, who's in police intelligence, you know, here's a letter, they don't know who it's from, they don't know who Hydell is, they don't have a record of an A.J. Hydell there, so it was just filed away in the files of the Dallas Police Intelligence. The weekend of the assassination, the FBI swept through the Dallas Police Station. They even went through motorcycle officers' saddlebags on their motorcycles. They went through their lockers. They went through the whole place, and they took anything that even smelled like it might have something to do with the assassination. And after that little purge, this letter went missing, and nobody's ever seen it since, and therefore I have not written about it because I cannot prove that that was there. But I think that, coupled with the warning that was sent to the FBI the night